part of the meeting. I would like to introduce our awardees for this year for the Religious Humanist of the Year, Michael Dowd and Connie Barlow. And I'll say something brief about them. If I gave you the whole introduction and things they've done, we wouldn't have time for the lecture. So, Reverend Michael Dowd is an evolutionary theologian, a best-selling author and evangelist for big history, and for building an honorable relationship to the future. His 2009 book, Thank God for Evolution, was endorsed by 6 Nobel Prize-winning scientists, noted skeptics, and by religious leaders across the spectrum. His work has been featured in the New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Newsweek, Discover, Wired, Skeptic, and on CBC, CNN, ABC News, and Fox News. Michael and his wife, Connie Barlow, an acclaimed science writer and evolution educator, permanently travel North America, promoting the inspiring side of science, religious naturalism, and one-story spirituality. They've addressed more than 2,000 religious and secular audiences since 2002, from Catholic, Protestant, evangelical Christian churches to Unitarians, to free thinkers, to secular grade school, high school, and university students, to New Thought, Integral, and Eastern spirituality groups. Here's Michael's personal 6-part credo, which I really like. Reality is my God. Evidence is my scripture. Big history is my creation story. Ecology is my theology. Integrity is my salvation. Ensuring a healthy future is my mission. In 2009, he presented Evolution and the Global Integrity Crisis at Caltech and the United Nations, and in 2012 delivered a TED Talks on why we struggle and suffer. Michael blogs for the Humanist. Okay, I'll go to I told, and that's a very condensed version. All right, I'll skip all of this. I'll just say that Michael's great joy in life is telling the history of everyone and everything in ways that inspire and empower people of all ages and theological orientations to know real freedom and to live in integrity and fulfill their evolutionary mission. And Connie is an author of popular science books and articles and developer of the Great Story website. She has lots of books, and I won't name them because he wants me to get going. And she's founder and webmaster of Torreva Guardians, an internet community of botanists, naturalists, and others dedicated to ensuring the persistence in the wild of America's most endangered conifer tree, the Torreya taxifolia. And in the 1990s, she contributed articles to Wild Earth magazine and towards encouraging others in conversation to develop deep time eyes as a way of learning the history of evolutionary change and paleoecological interactions. And I'll move on a lot. You can look up on their website, you can get all kinds of details on what they're doing. Connie is an evolutionary humanist and a Unitarian Universalist. He is a well-known developer of curricula for children's religious education that highlight our shared evolutionary story. Since 2002, she and Michael have lived entirely on the road as America's evolutionary evangelists. I think we were talking about 14 years ago, they visited us when we were in Connecticut, and they had a brand new RV. Now that RV is 350,000 miles.
It's actually not even an RV, it's a Dodge Sprinter.
Oh, right. So both have also been interviewed guests on the shared series. They have a podcast called Inspiring Naturalism, and both are on the advisory board of the Religious Naturalists Association. And without any further ado, I'd like to invite you both up to receive the Religious Humanist of the Year.
All right, thank you, thank you.
Okay. Well,
All right, Michael, I'm going to stand at, I'm going to use this and you can grab your lap.
okay. Without any further ado. Yes.
Yeah. That's okay. This is a great microphone, so I'm going to use this. You'll keep track of Michael cruising across here. I'm Connie Barlow, and I am thrilled to be invited to stand here and accept the Religious Humanist Award. Many of you might have the same experience that I've had, and that's that humanist is a tradition that has been expressed by individuals through time. And those of us who've been lucky enough to encounter a book, generally by someone who wrote it long ago, often by someone who's dead, that completely gave us a sense of, finally, someone speaks what I feel, but I could never quite explain, and now I can just move on out into the world and do what I need to do. Thank you for doing that. The person who spoke to me early on was Julian Huxley, a great evolutionary biologist, born I think in 1887, died the year after I graduated college, 1975. He's the great grandson of Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's great advocate, and he was a signer of the second Humanist Manifesto and was involved in humanism long before that as well. I'm just curious here, is there anybody else, if Bob Tapp were here, I would know, he would raise his hand. Is there anybody else who would count Julian Huxley as one of their roots for coming in to free-thinking humanism?
Yep.
Let's talk afterwards. Just one person here? Okay, great. The way Michael and I are going to run this is that because we have a wonderful intimate group here, Michael and I are going to dance out of each other. I'll take about the first 10 minutes. Michael will also be showing about 10 minutes of slides here. And we're going to reserve quite a bit of time for colloquy, not just Q&A, but dialogue with you all. I've been to several events at GA, and it's interesting how often the most interesting parts for me have been in the dialogue section. So I'd like to basically just mention 3 avenues in which I have benefited from Julian Huxley and those around him. He was such a great writer. To be able to go out into the world and make some applications of my worldview, which is known as religious humanism, religious naturalism is another term for it. Julian Huxley's term was evolutionary humanism. He coined that. How many of you have ever heard of evolutionary humanism as a real term? Excellent. You may not know Julian Huxley coined that. But these 3 areas, 2 of which, the first 2 I'll mention, I won't mention much here, but if any of you are interested, we can dialogue about that in the comments. But the 3rd one, I'm sure all of you have some deep interest in, and we want to structure this talk in a way where we can find the mutual interests here. The first one, probably the reason why, in fact, look what Michael has put here. The reason why I think I've been invited into the Religious Naturalism Award is because I have done a lot of applied work of this in trying to bring this focus of an evolutionary universe that is something to be celebrated, and in which, even though it's 14 billion years old, and there's hundreds of thousands billions of galaxies and stars out in the world, nonetheless, there's a place for humans and there's a place for what humans do in it. And so that's the work that I've done, primarily within Unitarian Universalism, in bringing in some curricula, not through the UUA, but through our website, thegreatstory.org. I'd like to point out that I'm not doing that work anymore, but it's all up on the website, thegreatstory.org. You can click on kids curricula. But we've got a couple sitting here in the audience now. I want to make sure you all know, because John and Heather Cleland, hosts here, please stand up, are not only carrying on the tradition. I mean, look what John's wearing there. And I don't know, are your kids still wearing?
Yeah, they have. Yeah, Katie just had to take Connor out because he was being too loud.
Right. I mean, they're
You probably
families,
heard
so-
when it was announced that you'd been on ABC. He started A, B, C, D. So the older one took him out, but the older, Hayden's the older one, and then Darius, the middle child, they both completed their first Cosmala. So they have their Cosmalas as well.
Cosmos, okay, Cosmala. It's also known as the Great Story Beads, Universe Story Beads, what do the nuns call it? Catholic?
Cosmic Rosary.
Cosmic Rosary, so forth. But what it is, it's the story of the universe in order, bead by bead. And John is a chemical engineer, and by golly, some of the fun beads that they've been able to make themselves and determine which aspects of the universe stories speak to them. So they're really the next generation of moving this in as Unitarian Universalists, Midland, Michigan, and very strong in the free-thinking humanist tradition, and much, much better at branching out into other religious and non-religious aspects than I am. I am just such a humanist. It's great to be in this audience, and I really appreciate this. The second one that I'm somewhat known for, but in UU context, probably not as well known for in terms of my contributions to religious humanism, have been my science writing that I've done. And Michael, could you hold up the one book that I brought over there?
Right there.
Okay. Yeah. This is the one that if anyone needs to
Called
know.
Green Space, Green Time, The Way of Science. You could say the spirituality of science. This is one of the leading books in the field of religious naturalism.
Right. And this was in 1997, and what I'd like to mention here, this was my third book, and it was the third book that contained Julian Huxley in it as well. And in this one, I excerpted him in my first two books. They were anthologies published by MIT Press. And in this one, I brought him up as my ghost that I asked questions of and felt like I was carrying on his tradition. So I'd like to talk more about that one later. The other thing that some of you might want to talk about, we've got a lot of that on the website. This is, go to thegreatstory.org and you'll see just the word death. What I was amazed at how much original work I could do and that Michael could also help with, that the humanists hadn't already done. Julian Huxley hadn't done things with this. And it's basically the power of bringing a deep time perspective of feeling our great self, part of this long lineage of evolution and the evolutionary impulse moving through us now, and how that can help us ease into a great sense of self. So we're not focused on my salvation, my this, my that, but as we age, we start feeling that sense of great self, and we feel like we're carrying forward the wisdom of the ancestors, and then at some point we hand that off, actually hand it backwards as off we go, and then the young ones follow us. I just feel that this completely naturalistic understanding of the universe is powerful, and especially as we live in an age in which a passive approach to death too often creates incredible suffering, not only for the individual, but especially their family. because we now have to actively say no to things that are asked for us that just extend the suffering, extend the financial cost passed on to the generations that follow us. So I believe that religious humanism, religious naturalism, all of these things can not just get in there and play with the big ones on the issues of death, but we are, boom, right through there. I only know of one, well actually two people who've used some of the stuff on our website, but we have a lot there, humanistic type resources that have the aesthetics, have that whole human side of it, humanizing it to make it something that is heartful and yet completely natural and celebratory for memorial services. So I would enjoy talking more about that. So those are the three: kids curricula, death as something that from a religious naturalist, a religious humanist perspective, wide open field for what we do with it. And then also how we bring forward the traditions and the individual mentors we've had dead and alive, and make sure that their influence carries on so that seekers out there can find us. And that includes a website that's so important to have. Okay, Michael, your part. Oh, look at that. He's adjusting. He didn't know I was going to mention this part of the program, so thanks.
Great. I actually think Connie's work on death is so crucial that I have about a 3 or 4 minute sort of summary of it, because I think it's one of her greatest contributions to the entire field of not just religious naturalism and evolutionary eco-humanism, but also just in general to our understanding of mortality and death from our best evidential science-based perspective, nothing otherworldly. So I just want to give just a very brief overview of I think, one of her greatest contributions. The gifts of chaos and death in an evolving cosmos. What she does, and all of this is available up on the website, she takes a look at all of the major scientific disciplines that have anything to say about death. Paleontology, evolutionary biology, embryology, cell biology, and ecology, astronomy and astrophysics, geology and geography and math, and then takes a look at some of the major discoveries in each of these areas that have helped us come to an understanding that there's not only nothing wrong with death, there's something profoundly right with death in an evolutionary cosmos, that we could not even have a cosmos like we do if it weren't for the existence of death at every scale. Mountains die, oceans die, continents die. Without the death of species, there'd be no complex life beyond pond scum. I mean, I've got nothing against pond scum, but when you compare it to the world we actually experience, death is what makes it possible. Without the death of fetal cells in the embryonic stage of development, we'd all be spheres. The reason that we have shape is because cells died here, 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 and here. Without the death of food, without the death of plants and animals, there would be no food. This is obvious when we think about it, but we're not used to thinking about the creative, positive role that death has. Without the death of stars, there would be no periodic table of elements, no planets, no life. The very atoms of our bodies are created inside stars that died. Without the death of elders, there would be no room for children. I mean, think about it. In a finite world, if all you have is birth with no death, very quickly you're wall-to-wall people, wall-to-wall skunks, wall-to-wall bacteria 60 feet deep. It doesn't take long. So death is essential on a finite planet. And what we've come to see is that death is natural and necessary at every level of reality, and thus death is no less sacred than life. And knowing this was me 6 years ago. I went through a very serious bout of cancer. I had a tumor the size of my fist in my spleen. And even when I was looking at the possibility that I could die in 6 months, and there was a period where we thought that that could happen, I had what religious people call the peace that passes understanding. And it wasn't because I was holding out hope for pearly gates and mansions when I died. I'm a religious naturalist. I have no supernatural or otherworldly beliefs whatsoever. I interpret all mythic language as saying something metaphoric about this one reality in which we live and move and have our being. In fact, I sometimes say, and I'm not just joking, if where I go to when I die isn't the very same place that all other plants and animals and bacteria have gone, I'm going to be pissed. And I'm eternally grateful, to use religious language, that I had this experience. This is my granddaughter, who's now 5.5, when she was about 18 hours old, on my chest, wrapped up with a baby rat. David Brooks, in a New York Times piece a few years ago, said, "We think the budget mess is a squabble between partisans in Washington, but in large measure it's about our inability to face death and our willingness as a nation to spend whatever it takes to push it just slightly over the horizon." I mean, imagine, this is stuff that our ancestors never had to deal with. Your grandparents never had to say no to what's now considered the standard. And many people, imagine this guy, for example, imagine he's 80 years old, he's lived a great life, he's had a positive legacy, and in the last 6 months of his life, he's kept alive like this at the cost of 35 college educations. What's his net legacy? It's really mixed. So we see that this pathetic notion of death as, a punishment for sin. It's crazy. Until we grasp that death plays a vital and necessary role in the evolving cosmos, Christianity will continue to be shackled by unnatural, otherworldly notions of the gospel, as if the good news is merely cosmic fire insurance. Great, I get to avoid being tortured forever. Ain't that great news? Medical technologies will continue to prolong physical and emotional suffering and provoke family discord. The medical industry will continue to underwrite the widening gap between the rich and the poor, and seniors and their families will continue to be seduced into perhaps the greatest generational injustice and legacy diminishing evil in history. So you can see I'm pretty passionate about this material that Connie's developed on death. So I'm not going to get into this yet. I just want to speak. Actually, I don't even want that. I just want to speak from my heart about what it means to me to be a religious naturalist, an evolutionary humanist, a religious humanist, and to be honored for that. I became a religious humanist almost overnight in 1988. I used to be an anti-evolutionary fundamentalist. You can probably tell from my style that I'm a Pentecostal. I used to show up at science gatherings with tracts, those little pamphlets, and would argue with anybody who thought the world was more than 6,000 years old. And now I travel all over North America with my atheist wife, popularizing a sacred way of thinking about evolution. So however you think about reality, clearly it has a sense of humor. And what happened was in 1988, I met Father Thomas Berry, who's a Catholic priest. He was one of the most significant evolutionary and ecological thinkers of the 20th century. And when I was introduced to his thinking, it was all about, he was really furthering Teilhard de Chardin's understanding that we are not separate from the universe, that we are the universe becoming conscious of itself. That the universe as a whole has gone from simple atoms to more complex atoms, to molecules, to more complex molecules, to creatures, to more complex creatures, and then to societies and more complex societies. And we see this one unfolding process that we are that process become conscious of itself. So we are, as Julian Huxley said, we are evolution become aware of itself, evolution become conscious of itself. We are nature uncovering its own nature. A human being looking through a telescope is literally the universe looking at itself and just going, whoa. A biology student looking through a microscope. It's the planet Earth learning with awareness or consciousness how it's functioned unconsciously and instinctually for billions of years. Brian Swim is a professor of cosmology. He's got these two great quotes that help people to sort of get this. He says, 4 billion years ago, the Earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. Earth was once molten rock, and now it sings opera. Here's another quote that I really like. He says, you take the entire history of the universe, you can sum it up in 2 sentences. You take a great cloud of hydrogen gas and you just leave it alone. And it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings. So that sacred story, what's now called big history, the history of everyone and everything, it's an evolutionary humanism. I mean, I think the biggest difference between old humanism and sacred humanism, religious humanism, evolutionary humanism, ecological humanism, is the shift from anthropocentric to biocentric understandings of the human and our role in the body of life. Anthropocentrism, human-centeredness, is partly what's got us in the mess we are now. I'm not blaming humanism, I'm just saying that it's human-centered religion. Most of the great religious traditions that currently exist are profoundly human-centered, in the sense of it's all about us, and we are superior to the other species. Nonsense. If it weren't for the bacteria in your gut doing what they do, we'd all be dead. Bacteria would do just fine without us. We wouldn't last a day without them. So they are the superior beings, in my opinion. And so our role then is to participate in this with conscious awareness and then basically honoring the whole and being a blessing. Well, I remember, in fact, let me say this, and then I'm going to invite Connie to sort of just be up here with me and say some things before I do this reality rule. I forget where I was going to go. And you're not going to be able to help me at all. Connie, do you have any sense of where I was going? Well, it'll either pop back or not. But do you have anything you wanted to say before I do the Ten Commandments thing?
No.
Okay. Religion has had a trivial and inconsequential notion of the divine, and it's killing us. This human, I'm back on track. This human-centeredness is killing us. It's killing the planet. Because we've had this sense that it's all about us, we have treated primary reality, whether you call that the goddess, or whether you call it nature, or whether you call it reality, or the body of life, or whatever, we've been treating primary reality, that is that aspect of reality, that if it didn't exist, we couldn't exist, namely the air, the water, the soil, the bacteria in us, as I was saying before. All the aspects of nature, of reality, that we need to survive, we've been treating it secondarily. We've been treating it just like a backdrop, because our true home was somewhere else. And I'm generalizing mostly the Western religious traditions, but the Eastern religious traditions have not been a whole lot better, other than Taoism and Confucianism, but have not been a lot better. Certainly some of like the Hindu tradition and Buddhism has not. All of these traditions that have emerged in the last 2,500 years are very transcendent-oriented and disparaging of nature. There's a profound book I read just about 2 years ago called The Green History of Religion that talks about the last 8,000 years, what the environment was doing, what the climate was doing, which pretty much forced these religions to be so transcendent. So I want to just very briefly mention 10 commandments to avoid extinction. And I'm not saying these are channeling anything otherworldly. What I'm suggesting is that this is what reality is telling us. Thomas Berry very profoundly said, we are talking only to ourselves. We are not talking to the rivers. We're not listening to the wind and the climate. Most of the disasters that are happening now are a consequence of that spiritual autism. If we don't get personification, we can't understand religion. We can't understand the world's myths, period. And this is vital for humanist, atheist, freethinkers, basically those of us without a supernatural orientation. It is vital for us to get personification. Wendell Berry understood the power of personification. He said, nature is party to all our deals and decisions, and she has more votes, a longer memory, and a sterner sense of justice than we do. James Hillman, one of the famous psychologists of the 20th century, said, loving is a way of knowing, and for love to know, it must personify. Personifying is thus the heart's mode of knowing. It's not a lesser, primitive way of apprehending, but a finer one. To enter myth, we must personify. Personify carries us into myth. Now, he's not meaning by myth an untrue story. He's using it the way that Joseph Campbell did, that is a narrative that puts us in accord with the nature of reality. So I want to share with you one of these, Julia Roberts speaking as Mother Nature, because Hollywood and Conservation International have gotten the memo on personification. And this is a profoundly naturalistic perspective. This is an evolutionary humanist, evolutionary or ecological humanist perspective. And, you know, Harrison Ford speaking as the oceans. You could say he's the voice of Poseidon today. Kevin Spacey makes a wonderfully snarky rainforest. You gotta experience it. Oh, so I think I need to put my microphone by this thing. Let's make sure this works.
Some call me nature. Others call me Mother Nature. I've been here for over 4.5 billion years. 22,500 times longer than you. I don't really need people, but people need me. Yes, your future depends on me. When I thrive, you thrive. When I falter, you falter. Or worse. But I've been here for eons. I have fed species greater than you, and I have starved species greater than you. My oceans, my soil, my flowing streams, my forests, they all can take you or leave you. How you choose to live each day, whether you regard or disregard me, doesn't really matter to me. One way or the other. Your actions will determine your fate, not mine. I am nature. I will go on. I am prepared to evolve. Are you?
Wow. I'll just give you just a taste of the Kevin Spacey piece. Again, he's speaking as the rainforest, not about the rainforest. It's like the rainforest addressing us, and he says, humans, big brains, opposable thumbs, so smart. They'll figure out what I'm good for. And then he stops. He says, humans, making air. Now that'll be fun to see. Loyal Rue is one of the leading philosophers of religion, and he's also a leading religious naturalist and evolutionary eco-humanist. And he says, in his book, religion is not about God. What he means is that religion is about our relationship to reality. And yes, reality has been personified as the various gods and goddesses. But if religion is doing its job, it's to help us live in the right relationship to what's fundamentally, undeniably, and inescapably real. I love this quote. He says, the most profound insight in the history of humanity is that we should seek to live in accord with reality. Indeed, living in harmony with reality may be accepted as a formal definition of wisdom. If we live at odds with reality, foolishly, then we will be doomed. But if we live in proper relationship with reality, wisely, then we shall be saved. Now, of course, he goes on to say that all cultures have a different sense of how to do that, but that makes total sense when you realize that reality in the desert is totally different than reality in the jungle, and reality 3,000 years ago in China is different than reality, say, 200 years ago in New York. In fact, I did a program, my second TEDx talk was called Reality Reconciles Science and Religion. And I went on their website about a week before this event, and I discovered that they had a typo. It said, Reverend Michael Dowd Reality reconciles science and religion. So, I thought it was kind of cool, but I said, you got the colon in the wrong place. I said, but I got to tell you, I like this Reverend Reality thing, right? Well, the organizers said, we do too. And so I contacted my publicist. who's gotten some really great press, even on Fox. I was on Fox and Friends on Sunday morning. My mother, who only watches Fox News, was watching. I was really thrilled. But at any rate, so my publicist said, Mike, let's see, Bill Nye, the science guy, Michael Dowd, Reverend Reality, we're running with this puppy, right? So I went online the next day and I put green clergy shirts in Google, and I found these Celtic green clergy shirts. So now it's like my regalia. I become Reverend Reality. Now, of course, I can usually count a young philosophy major, 20, 25 years old, philosophy, student in college or university, and they always try to trip me up. Well, what do you mean by reality? And I love Philip K. Dick's definition. He says, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. So that is what we need to live in right relationship to, what's fundamentally, inescapably real, and that includes the air, water, soil, and life upon which we depend, primarily. In fact, here, I'm going to use secular and religious language. You're going to see both are legitimate. And again, when I use the word God, I spell it G-O-D-D-E. Sounds the same, God. But I spell it G-O-D-D-E, and the reason I do that is because I want to shut people out of this idea that God is some supernatural being out there somewhere. And plus it gives it sort of a feminine twist, G-O-D-D-E, right? And so what I mean by that is simply whatever else your concept of God may be, it's got to include nature. Because any God who merely transcends nature is trivial, impotent, and inconsequential compared to a God who transcends and includes nature. So, if you can't possibly understand how reality, or God, created complex life if you don't understand extinction. You can't possibly understand how reality, or God, or the goddess, or whatever, created the Great Lakes, or soil in the northern part of the world if you don't understand glaciers. You can't understand how reality or God created the periodic table of elements, or planets, or life, or even the atoms of our bodies if you don't understand red giants and supernova explosions. Watch this photo very carefully. You surely can't understand how reality or God created the continents and the oceans and the atmosphere and the continents if you don't understand plate tectonics. Now, we don't merely believe that the Atlantic Ocean is growing at the same rate that our fingernails grow. We know it. We've got the satellites to measure exactly how fast the Atlantic Ocean is growing and how fast the Pacific Ocean is shrinking. I believe that one of the great insanities today is the collective insanity of the theism versus atheism debate. You got thousands, maybe millions of people that are debating whether or not God is real or whether or not God exists, when the one real God, namely reality with a personality, whether you use that language or not, we've been out of right relationship to, and we're now about to experience consequences of biblical proportion. And, imagine that you walked into a room and you overheard a debate between two people really getting into it, whether or not Uncle Sam is real. Of course Uncle Sam exists. No, Uncle Sam doesn't exist. What would you think? You'd think they don't get it. Uncle Sam's a personification of what's real, namely the U.S. government. So that's what I'm meaning, is reality with a personality, not a person outside reality. And I think all of us who are evolutionary humanists, evolutionary, religious naturalists, those of us who choose to use the word God, you don't have to, you just use the word reality. But this is what we're meaning. And all God talk is interpreted. That is, reality does something, and then we interpret it as what the divine is saying or doing. I mean, think about climate. We don't know of a single culture anywhere in the world that didn't interpret the climate as divine blessing or judgment. Either the gods or the goddess or God or whatever. And it's not a surprise because, can you think of any force in the universe that more consistently brings cultures into being, sustains them, and then brings them out of being, destroys them, than climate? So in that context, I want to offer a first draft of reality's rules, 10 commandments to avoid extinction. And when I say first draft, is I farmed these out to well, actually probably about 6,000 people, but I got feedback from dozens of people, ecologists, theologians, and I'm Any feedback that you can think of, a way to improve the language, because this is, what I'm trying to say is this is collective intelligence. This isn't just my wording. I consider these grace limits. These are the conditions for existence. If we want to continue existing as a species, we need to obey these, to use religious language. And again, what I'm saying is this is what reality is telling us. Okay, that's all I'm meaning. Stop thinking of me as anything less than the voice of undeniable and inescapable reality. Imagining that I'm a clockmaker outside a clockwork universe is a form of idolatry, an unreal notion of me that is creating hell on earth and leading to your own extinction. The universe is not a machine, it's my voice, my hands. Reality is my secular name, and the cosmos is my local self. If you don't honor my presence within time and nature, your grandchildren and theirs will condemn you and your religion. Stop thinking of divine revelation and God's word apart from evidence. Imagining that my most important and up-to-date guidance was provided thousands of years ago belittles me and has made you blind and deaf to what I've been revealing for centuries now through all forms of evidence. Your scientific, historic, and cross-cultural discoveries discerned through global collective intelligence are my evidential revelation. Facts are my native tongue and trends are my bullhorn. If you fail to honor evidence as modern-day scripture, more authoritative than elders and ancient texts, you will perish. And again, I'm simply personifying reality. I'm not saying something supernatural is telling us this. Stop thinking of your creation story, your sacred story, apart from big history. As Connie mentioned, and as John Host and his family modeled, this is the entire history of the universe represented in beads. Each bead on our cosmology, or our universe story, is some significant event in the universe story. The history of everyone and everything that I've revealed through evidence, including what you call green history or environmental history, must be incorporated into your creation myths and sacred rituals as rapidly as possible. Without a factual view of my deep-time creativity extending over billions of years, you will have a pathetic notion of me and how I reveal truth, a trivial view of science and religion, and a dysfunctional and even suicidal understanding of your past, present, and possible futures. Stop thinking of theology apart from ecology. Nature's ways are my ways. When you overshoot the carrying capacity of the land, air, and sea, when you dishonor grace limits through overpopulation, overexploitation, or pollution beyond nature's ability to transform it, you betray me and condemn future generations. Thinking that you could worship me without honoring my nature, which of course includes the soil, forests, and everything upon which you depend, is idolatry. Repent of your human-centered theologies and come home to me, to reality, to your true self. The entire Earth community will be rooting for you. Stop defining and measuring progress in short-term, human-centered ways. See, those first four were about idolatry, basically. This is when we get into sustainability and what reality is telling us. Stop defining and measuring, I already read that. Making decisions with the seventh generation in mind isn't just a good idea. To do otherwise is evil. You must immediately begin measuring progress, growth, and success in ways that honor primary reality. For example, by how rapidly you can decarbonize the atmosphere, build soil, restore wetlands, reforest the land, and preserve other species in their habitats. To think that you could master and control my nature is proof of your idolatry. Humble yourselves and work with rather than against the restorative and regenerative dynamics of this living planet. Doing so will enable you over time to restore the garden you so foolishly defiled in your human-centered hubris. The best definition of hubris I've ever heard is the overweening pride of the doomed. Stop allowing the free or subsidized polluting of the commons. Externalizing the true costs and environmental impacts of your business activities onto society, the community of life, and the future is not merely short-sighted, it is evil. Repent and redesign your economic system so that it mimics the laws of ecology, and stop creating chemicals and technologies that defile my nature. The impact of individuals, corporations, and nations on the larger body of life, for good or ill, must be reflected back to them. Only then will they be incentivized to do what is right, just, and ecological, and deterred from doing what is wrong, unjust, and reprehensible. Stop using renewable resources faster than they can be replenished. I mean, this is obvious. Unsustainable is just a pretty word for evil. How is this not obvious? My grace is boundless only if you honor my nature and don't exceed the rate at which my living systems, soil, forests, groundwater, oceans, ecologies, can renew themselves. Limits are sacred and must be honored. As you are now painfully discovering, the story of Adam and Eve is about dishonoring grace limits or carrying capacity, not disobedience. Stop driving other species, plants and animals alike, to extinction. It is both foolish and self-destructive to dishonor the living beings inside of you and outside you that make your life possible. Do whatever it takes to preserve biodiversity, including ethically reducing your numbers and assisting other species in migrating as the climate shifts. Stop using non-renewable resources in ways that harm or rob future generations. All metals, minerals, and other non-renewable resources should be recycled as close to 100% as possible. Your energy-intensive, throwaway culture of greed, what you deceptively refer to as a global free market, is an abomination. To reduce your use of non-renewable resources, you must re-inhabit your local communities, your watersheds, your bioregions. There's no other way. Simplify your lifestyles and become a blessing to your human and non-human neighbors, and thus to posterity. In so doing, you will become saviors rather than destroyers of the future. Regardless of beliefs, the former are Christians, the latter anti-Christians. Stop exploring for coal, oil, and natural gas. Keep most of it in the ground. You must reduce carbon dioxide and methane emissions as much as possible, as rapidly as possible. Given that you already have 5 times more fossil fuels in reserve than is needed to create hell on earth and drive you to extinction, it is insane to keep exploring for more. And for my sake and yours, but especially for the sake of your grandchildren and theirs, don't rely on hopes, prayers, or techno-fix miracles. Rather, reduce your consumption habits and energy use substantially and immediately. And finally, stop prioritizing the wants of the wealthy over the needs of the poor. When I said the love of money is the root of all evil, and whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me, I meant it. Periodic jubilees or occasions of general and generous debt forgiveness are not optional. They are necessary if you hope to avoid societal breakdown. Your economic system rewards the few at the expense of the many, measures progress by how fast it can turn the biosphere into pollution, and forces billions to betray the future in pursuit of the so-called good life. The fact that you don't call this demonic, which it is further proof of your idolatry. When your local and regional economies honor grace limits and the well-being of my nature first, and when you stop making excuses for the inexcusable gap between rich and poor, then and only then will a just, healthy, beautiful, and sustainably life-giving future be yours. So for a short version of that, it's up on YouTube. You just put in reality's rules, 10 Commandments to Avoid Extinction. I've got it up on YouTube. It's 17 minutes long. I love this. Sooner or later, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. And that's true for us as a species and collectively, not just as individuals. So I think this is the great reckoning. Humanity has been out of right relationship to reality. Whether we use secular or religious names for that, we've been out of right relationship to reality, primary reality, and there are now consequences that are unavoidable. I also hope that it will be the great homecoming. The prodigal species, we've squandered our inheritance, we're waking up to our predicament, in the pig pen as it were, and we're coming home to evidential reality. And that's where evolutionary humanists, ecological humanists, religious naturalists have the potential to be serious influencers. Any religion in the future, if it's to be viable, will have ecology at its heart. Because here's the thing. If ecology, if whatever the religious people 100 years from now mean by the word theology, if it doesn't include ecology, their grandchildren will condemn them. So the main thing where I go into this, I spend 3 hours going into all these concepts. On our main website, here's Connie's deaf material. She's got all kinds of programs. Here's her kids' curricula. She spent 12 years developing programs and working with others that have developed programs. And this is my grace limits page where I've actually, I think I must have recorded 1,000 hours audios. And then standing to the future, I get into 3 programs. Each of these is an hour long. Connie spent time editing them. And grace limits. I think this is the most important page on my website, other than that. And I'll conclude, and then we'll just open it off for dialogue for the rest of our time together. I'll conclude with my favorite one-line piece of scripture from Carl Sagan. Science is at least in part informed worship.